Nightmares of the New Town. The city of Edinburgh is without a doubt a location of two halves. Sitting beyond the ancient Nor Loch and beneath Edinburgh Castle's shadow poses a masterpiece of city planning. Edinburgh New Town, built in stages between 1767 and around 1850, retains much of its original neoclassical and Georgian period architecture. The decision to construct a new town, decided after overcrowding inside the old town city walls, reached a breaking point. The age of enlightenment had arrived in Edinburgh, and the outdated city fabric did not suit the professional and merchant classes who lived there. After 1800, the success of the first new town led to grander schemes. The iconic Princes Street and surrounding Charlotte Square would soon connect with now well-known names such as Randolph Cliff and Dean Village. The impressive Dean Bridge began construction in 1829 and completed by the end of 1831. The breathtaking four-arch structure spans over 400 feet and is 106 feet above the water level and carries Queensferry Road above the Dean Gorge. Upon the bridge's completion, a toll gate erected at each end of the bridge and charged pedestrians 1 penny per head to enjoy the view from the structure. On the Dean Bridge's far side sits an address surrounded by dominating trees, cobbled roads and attractive winding dense bushes. It is here, on this Edinburgh New Town street, that our first terrifying story begins. The following story occurred towards the end of the 19th century. The Gordon family occupied a second-storey flat at an unknown address on Buckingham Terrace. The location comprised of attractive Georgian architecture with wide grass verges and hedgerows, the flat above them used for storage and unattended. After a fortnight of occupying the property, Mrs. Gordon complained to the landlord. Her concerns about the sound of disturbance coming from above relayed to the puzzled man. The terrible commotion, apparent throughout the dead of night, continued to disturb the family since moving in. The landlord could not comprehend the new tenant's complaint, as the flat was entirely unoccupied. Sometime over the coming weeks, the same tenant awoke in the night to the terrifying sight of a great horny hand, mal-shaped and murderous, in wait to seize her. Suddenly, the terrifying object vanished through the adjoining door and disappeared along the corridor. In the morning, the other family members claimed to have seen nothing of this frightening apparition, replying to the startled woman, "No, not even a mouse." On another occasion, Mrs. Gordon awoke to the sight of a broad-shouldered man standing in the doorway dressed in a pea-coat and heavy boots, traditional sailor's attire. The terrifying figure stood there staring towards the frightened woman. In one hand he held a bundle of red and white rags, and in the other a small bladder of lard. The strange figure's face merely a red mass. Suddenly the man vanished, and the sound of heavy boots charging upwards filled the stairwell. The sleeping residents awakened with the loud footsteps, but there was nobody to see. Many years previously, local legend said that a retired captain in the merchant service had rented Mrs. Gordon's rooms. He was an extraordinary individual, and although retired and land-bound, would continue to wear his nautical dress. A heavy drinker, he would spend most of his days intoxicated within the walls of the property. At that time, there happened to be a baby overheard in the rooms above. The sound angered the captain to such an extent that he warned the mother that should the infant continue to disturb him, he would not be held responsible for his actions. His warnings to no avail, the enraged man charged upstairs holding a knife. Upon reaching the room, he decapitated the infant in a drunken rage. Afterwards, he would conceal the dead infant's head and body inside a nearby grandfather clock within the property. He returned to his quarters and drunk until unconscious. Upon the gruesome discovery, the man arrested for the infant's murder. Being found insane, he was committed to a lunatic asylum where he would eventually perish by his hand. Does the enraged, intoxicated spirit of the captain still walk the corridors of Buckingham Terrace today? The Lermans Hotel sits directly across from Buckingham Terrace and adjacent to busy Queensferry Road. The hotel, named after previous Lord Provost John Lermans, the hotel constructed in the 19th century. Throughout the years, the property has witnessed poltergeist activity. Reports from staff and visitors in the hotel include doors that open and close by themselves, the sound of distant whistling heard in the corridors, and interference with electrical devices such as hairdryers and kettles. According to Lily Seafield in Scottish Ghosts, the spirit plays pranks on guests from time to time, on occasion locking them out of their rooms. At other times, doors have found to have opened or closed and had locked have been found unlocked. An ex-staff member I spoke with recollects her time at the Lermans Hotel back in the late 1980s. She recalls that there were specific sections of the hotel that would see more significant activity than others. One specific room, she insists, was the worst of all. Staff would dread having to attend the room when guests would leave. It was a case of getting in and out as quickly as possible. I asked if she could remember the room number, but sadly she has forgotten since then. The hotel now operates as a travel lodge, and it would seem that paranormal activity continues today. A recent review on a travel website informs that a customer, while staying in the hotel in September 2015, witnessed his young grandson tipped out of bed in the middle of the night by unseen forces. The man insists there may well be some truth in the ghost stories. He said it felt like someone just lifted the bed. I can certainly verify he landed on the floor with a bang. Head along for a visit and spend the night at this attractive New Town hotel, if you dare. Travelling along Lermans Terrace and bypassing Dean Park Crescent, we arrive at the attractive location of Ann Street. It is here that a famous resident of the street continues to appear, even after his death over 100 years ago. Ann Street is a scenic and desirable place to live in the heart of Georgian Edinburgh. At the end of the 19th century, one of the street's houses was home to the Swan family. An uncle of the family was a great traveller, and the family often received letters from far-flung locations describing his latest exploits. The traveller would take off for months at a time, but would always keep in touch by mail, and would appear from time to time, sometimes without warning, to draw breath between his adventures. One evening, the family was stunned to see Mr Swan appear in their midst. They had expected him to be far away at sea, but they were delighted all the same. They rose to greet him as he strolled in through the front door, but before they had time to make him welcome, Mr Swan merely smiled at them, waved and disappeared. It was the oddest thing. The family puzzled by the strange occurrence for some weeks until news finally reached them that Mr Swan had drowned when the ship in which he had been travelling to some distant place had sunk. The time of his death coincided with the mysterious appearance in the family home. His visit had been a wish to see his family from the grave, just as he had in life. Mr Swan still returns to his old family home in Ann Street. Far from being an evil figure, it is said that he is very much a friendly ghost, popping in to say hello. On a cold, dark evening, when the wind is still and a full moon present, such as tonight, stand for a while, if you will, on this quiet and peaceful New Town location. You may just see the shadow of Mr Swan, checking in on his family or the current residents of Ann Street, which he would visit so many years ago. Jamaica Street was planned and constructed in 1802. The location displays a stark contrast to the otherwise magnificent Grand Georgian constructions within the area. The sight of the dark and imposing tenement buildings, complete with the infamously filthy and unruly Jamaica Street Lane, awash with houses of ill repute, small industries putting out smoke and smell and noise. By the 1940s, the location was deemed uninhabitable for community members, and by 1960 demolished and rebuilt. In 1981, the street renamed Jamaica Mews, as it now appears today. The appearance of this northern New Town street has all but vanished from those riotous days, but some elements remain. Elements of a supernatural nature. As far back as March the 30th, 1815, a story from a long-defunct Edinburgh journal titled The Caledonian Mercury tells of ghostly goings-on. In this story, a local man has appeared in court, charged with circulating a story about a ghost that has seen haunting a property on Jamaica Street. The gentleman in question, in 1815, defended himself at the trial, insisting that he had not only seen the ghost, but had spoken to it and engaged it in conversation on several occasions. However, he declined to disclose the content of these conversations because the ghost had sworn him to secrecy. On recent occasion, members of the public have described the sight of a man entirely red in colour and wearing a copper-coloured hat. He has appeared in the vicinity of the entrance to Jamaica Street, the slope that meets Jamaica Mews. In the summer months of 2020, I visited the site on a warm and pleasant evening. I photographed sections of the area and the whole time did not see a single resident or passer-by in the 10 or 15 minutes of my visit. The garages towards the rear of Jamaica Street provided a constant feeling of being watched. I felt growingly unwelcome where I stood that night. By the time I progressed along the road and to the following location, the feeling of foreboding eyes upon me had faded and gone. The Royal Circus Hotel, situated at number 18 Royal Circus, another Edinburgh New Town property with many haunted histories. The building, a large and popular hotel in the area, operated for many years. Sometime in the early 1970s, staff working inside the hotel complained of something not quite right. The figure spotted within the confines of the property, the sight of a woman with flowing black hair and a long white dress flitting through the corridors. The terrified staff reluctant to work within the areas in which the woman sighted. The apparition so frightened the staff that they contacted a Dr. John Belloff of Edinburgh's psychology department. The man would spend much time investigating the site but could not prove the ghostly lady's existence. He recalls, "It was 10 p.m. when I approached the Royal Circus for an investigation of my own. The streets were deserted. Low in the dimly lit area where crescents of Georgian architecture wrapped themselves around the circumference of a dense shadowy path. There was no sign of the phantom lady, but I met with a friendly cat at the entry. It was black and white and had long hair. Intriguing, I thought, but hardly conclusive." A colleague whose family worked in the hotel in or around about 1975 claims to have heard the spectral dark-haired woman's stories, but never witnessed the ghostly activity. She recalls staff asking to work in pairs while working shifts late at night within the confines of the Royal Circus Hotel. The staff members scared by the proposition of meeting the spectral white figure.
My name is Gill Finlayson. I live in Worcestershire. But I've been visiting Edinburgh for many, many years, having family links in the city, and I'm often to be found delving into both local and family history, whenever I'm able to do so. Several years ago, I decided that instead of staying in the old town, despite its close proximity to libraries, archives and transport, I'd rent a quiet apartment in Stockbridge. I chose an apartment towards the middle of St Stephen Street. Easy access into town, and although on the top of a 4-storey building, the walk upstairs was worth it. Beautiful flat. After a grueling day of travel, I arrived late afternoon and took temporary possession of my new home. I was looking forward to an enjoyable working and leisure break in fashionable Stockbridge. Although I'd booked a solo trip, the flat was very spacious, with a sitting room, compact bathroom with a shower over the bath, stylish kitchen and 2 bedrooms, a double and a twin. Bizarrely, I felt a jolt of disquiet as I opened the door to the twin bedroom. Dismissing the sensation, I decided on the double, feeling it was a better option anyway. After a little shopping and being pretty exhausted after such a long day, I went straight to bed and looked forward to a good night's sleep and to wake up refreshed the next morning. It was the very next morning when things began to go awry. I rose early in hopes of a quick breakfast and a brisk walk into town. I made a quick cup of coffee and went to use the shower. A few minutes in, I suddenly felt what seemed like a hefty tug on my left arm, and my feet lost their purchase on the wet surface of the bath, despite there being a shower mat. With a shockingly painful bump, I ended up flailing on the bottom of the bath, confused as to what had actually happened. Gathering my wits, I struggled to clamber out and take stock of my accident. This is going to hurt, I thought, already feeling the pain from my injuries. Struggling to get dried and dressed and already being in shock and pain, I decided that maybe it would be wise to visit A&E and get myself checked out. Gingerly, I donned my coat, picked up my bag and tried to unlock the front door. I'd secured it safely before going to bed. Nothing. Tried again. Nothing. Completely stuck. Flicked the latch up and down several times. Nothing at all. 10 minutes later, and with a rising sense of panic, I gave up trying to open the door and phoned the owner on my mobile. He assured me he'd be with me in 10 minutes and would fix it. It took him 20 minutes to fix the Yale mechanism, and he was completely puzzled as to why the jam had happened. It had never failed before. It was as if something or someone was playing malicious games with me. I eventually managed to attend the infirmary and was told by a doctor that although the side of my body would go through all the colours of the rainbow with bruises, I would be fine, and was told to take simple painkillers. Ever anxious of more accidents and even more aware of the uncanny atmosphere of the second bedroom, I left the hall light shining brightly on at night for the rest of my stay, keeping that particular door to the bedroom tightly shut. Was I aware of a presence? The idea of some sort of female entity had lodged in my mind. There was certainly something very disturbing about that room. Returning home to Worcestershire after several days, I contacted the owners to thank them very much for my stay. As I was very curious, I asked about the history of the flat. Evidently, they'd purchased it from a doctor who had lived there for many years with his elderly mother. Renovations had meant that the kitchen and twin bedroom were swapped around. That bedroom where I'd felt terribly uncomfortable was once the elderly lady's domain. Her kitchen. Was this perhaps a possessive, ghostly spirit who resented my intrusion? Did it stop me from staying at the bright and breezy Stockbridge flat again? No, it didn't. I asked a psychic friend for advice if I was to stay another time. She laughed and told me to always be polite and courteous, to ask permission to stay, put the kettle on, make her a cup of tea, and put out some shortbread. I stayed at the flat several times afterwards and always followed these simple rules, and I had no further problems at all. A little common courtesy obviously does go a long way. Wherever I've stayed since in the city, since that time, I've always made sure I've followed the same good advice. What I've neglected to say was, as my bruises formed, there was a clear impression of 5 purple fingerprints on my upper left arm. Since that moment, yes, I've always been very polite.
"25 years ago, I was privileged enough to visit something rather special. Mary King's Close, situated beneath Edinburgh city chambers, is now a high-profile tourist attraction and a must-see for would-be ghost hunters or anyone interested in Edinburgh history. In October 1995, this was not the case. Mary King's Close sat very much closed to the public. With the help of contact from the Church of Scotland, they arranged for a visit. A group of 10 visitors would attend a private tour of the location. The evening consisted of an extensive view of the city chambers and access to its many artefacts. At 9 p.m, the party travelled downstairs to the legendary Mary King's Close. A fascinating and hair-raising hour commenced, with the informative guide relaying many now well-recollected stories of the close and its inhabitants. As a side note, there were no miniature Scottish Piper dolls to be seen back then. As the tour concluded and the party made their separate ways, I conversed with a group member. "Did you think the close was as scary as they said?" she inquired. "Suitably creepy, yet informative," was my reply. She went on to inform me of something she described as considerably more sinister. It was a location close to where she worked and not far from Edinburgh city centre. The slightly nervous woman went on to tell me the full chilling story. Now, so shall I. There exists a substantial leafy glade close to the rear of Edinburgh's Royal Botanic Garden. Arboretum Avenue leads to two sizable concrete pillars that mark the entrance housed by considerable iron gates. Upon entering, you stand confronted by a wooden sign declaring the Rockheed Path. The Rockheed family resided at Inverleith House, situated in the grounds of the Botanic Garden. The Rockheed Path, named after them due to its location aligned to their estate. James Rockheed, the second Baronet of Craigleith, died in 1824 inside Inverleith House. His legacy, a man of eccentric tastes, recollected upon the descriptive path notice board. The family crest described as a man's head rough and hairy, and their coach decorated in heraldry. One story describes an encounter between James Rockheed and a plain-looking gentleman, unbeknown to be the Duke of Montague, on the same path. The question being, does James Rockheed continue to walk the path today? St Combs, situated at 23 Lomond Terrace, was used throughout the 1990s by the Church of Scotland. It was here the woman recollected her chilling tale. It was late summer, in or around about 1994. While standing by a window at the rear of the property, she noticed a figure standing adjacent to her on the nearby Rockheed Path. The sight of passers-by not unusual for this time of year, and the trail frequented by many dog walkers. This visitor was, however, different. The man stood dressed in a long black coat. He stared in the direction of the window and towards her. She recalls that he appeared in the same spot for a matter of minutes and continued to scrutinise her throughout. The look upon his pale white face conveyed an impression of disappointment or resentment, as if he knew her. The strange reality was that she had never seen him before. As soon as she turned to catch a staff member's attention, the man had disappeared. In 1996, a property next door to St Combs witnessed the mysterious visitor of the Rockheed Path. Builders were renovating the building recently purchased by a Scottish football player. The extensive grounds required landscape work, and one day a gardener worked at the rear of the property. Close to the boundary of the Rockheed Path, the gardener became very aware of somebody watching him. An older man on the path by the Water of Leith, as he recalls, stood scowling at him as he worked. He attempted to make light conversation with the visibly disapproving individual, but to no avail. The visitor continued to stare intensely and without reply. The gardener returned to his work along the property boundary and could see the man throughout. Suddenly, as he turned with a wheelbarrow to carry out the next task, he noticed that the disapproving visitor had vanished. Could the visiting spectre be that of James Rockheed? Does he continue to disapprove of the sight of mere commoners trespassing on his land? Perhaps his confrontation and submission with the triumphant Duke of Montague has left him bitter and resentful even in death. For the travellers of the Rockhead Path, dog walkers, day trippers and friends of the Water of Leith, the next time that you venture to this charming leafy glade, stop for a moment, if you will. Listen past the sound of the river and look for a discerning gentleman. It may be James Rockhead, standing directly behind you.